A billionaire single CEO, knocked on my door alone. What she said made a struggling single dad cry. Booker Williams wiped the sweat from his forehead as he finished fixing the broken latch on his small apartment door in downtown Detroit. At 31, he'd learned that safety wasn't just about protecting himself anymore. It was about keeping his 7-year-old daughter safe in a world that wasn't always kind to families like theirs. The neighborhood wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the best either. Most of his neighbors were working families just trying to get by, and they looked out for each other. Booker had been here for 3 years, ever since he'd lost his job at the automotive plant and couldn't afford the house payments anymore. He was settling in for the evening, reheating macaroni and cheese while his daughter colored at the kitchen table, when someone knocked on his door. Not the usual neighbor knock. This was hesitant, almost nervous. Booker glanced through the peephole and nearly dropped the plate in his hands. Standing in his dimly lit hallway was a white woman in what looked like a designer coat. Her blonde hair was perfect despite the October wind, and she clutched an expensive purse like it might shield her from the surroundings. She looked completely out of place, like a diamond in a tool shed. "Can I help you?" he called through the door, not opening it. Beautiful white women didn't show up at his apartment with good news. "Are you Booker Williams?" Her voice was clear, educated, the kind of voice that belonged in boardrooms and country clubs. "Depends who's asking. My name is Scarlet Montgomery. I'm the CEO of Montgomery Industries. I need to speak with you about something important." Booker's blood ran cold. Montgomery Industries, the massive corporation that owned half of Detroit's real estate, including the automotive plant where he'd worked for 8 years before his department was downsized. He opened the door slowly, keeping the chain lock in place. What could the CEO of Montgomery Industries possibly want with him? Scarlett looked up at him through the crack in the door, and to his surprise, there was something like shame in her blue eyes. "Mr. Williams, I've made a terrible mistake. Several terrible mistakes, actually, and I need to make them right. Lady, I don't know what you're talking about, but please," her voice cracked slightly. "I know how this looks. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm not here as a CEO. I'm here as someone who destroyed your life, and I need to try to fix it." Booker stared at her through the gap in the door, his mind racing. What could she possibly mean? "5 minutes," he said finally, unlatching the chain. "You get 5 minutes to explain yourself." What happened next would change not only his life, but his daughter's future forever. Hello, my Stop Racism family. Thank you for tuning in today. Before we dive deeper into this powerful love story, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your country and state in the comments below. Also, I'd love to know your thoughts. What did you think of the story so far? Do you believe love can truly conquer prejudice? Let us know in the comments. We love reading them. And trust me, your words motivate us to keep making these videos. Let's make this video reach at least 50 comments. Your support means the world to us, and it drives us to create even more emotional content for you. So don't forget to comment, share, and keep spreading love. Scarlett stepped into Booker's small but clean apartment, her designer heels clicking on the worn linoleum. The faint sound of crayons scratching against paper came from the living room, where a little girl sat on the floor surrounded by coloring books. She looked up curiously at the stranger her father had let inside. Scarlett's eyes softened for a moment before she turned her attention back to Booker. She looked around, taking in the second-hand furniture, the neatly stacked job applications spread across a folding table that doubled as his desk, and the children's toys tucked carefully into a corner. "Nice place," she said, and to his surprise, she sounded like she meant. "Cut the small talk," Booker replied sharply. "You said you destroyed my life. What are you talking about?" Scarlett sat heavily in his only armchair, suddenly looking less like a powerful CEO and more like a woman carrying an enormous burden. 3 years ago, Montgomery Industries bought the automotive plant where you worked. Do you remember the circumstances of your termination? Downsizing, budget cuts, last hired, first fired. The words still tasted bitter in his mouth. "That's what we told everyone, but it wasn't the truth." Scarlett's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Williams, you were specifically targeted for termination." Booker felt the room tilt. "Your supervisor, Jake Morrison, came to me with concerns about your work performance. He said you were insubordinate, unreliable, possibly stealing tools. She looked up at him with tears in her eyes. I believed him. I authorized your immediate termination without investigating further, but I was employee of the month 4 times. I never stole anything. I know that now. Scarlett's voice was thick with guilt. Last month, Morrison was arrested for embezzling over $200,000 from company accounts. During the investigation, we found evidence that he'd been systematically targeting black employees, making false reports to get them fired so he could hire his friends and family members. Booker sank onto his couch, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. From across the room, his daughter looked up nervously, sensing the tension. You destroyed my career based on the word of a racist thief. Yes, the simple admission seemed to cost her everything. You lost your job, your health insurance, your house. You've been struggling for 3 years because I was too lazy and too prejudiced to question whether a black man could really be as problematic as my white supervisor claimed. Booker's voice was sharp. Why are you telling me this? Because Morrison named you specifically during his confession. He laughed about how easy it was to convince me that you were trouble. Said I believed him because deep down people like me always assume people like you are the problem. Scarlett stood up, pacing to his small window that overlooked the street. He was right, Mr. Williams. I did assume the worst about you, because you were a young black man, and he was an older white supervisor. I didn't even look at your performance reviews. I just believed the stereotype. Booker shook his head slowly, glancing toward his daughter, who was now clutching her stuffed rabbit, wide-eyed. So what now? You apologize and go back to your mansion, feeling better about yourself, while I keep trying to stretch one paycheck into rent and groceries for 2. No, Scarlett said, turning to face him. Now I spend the rest of my life trying to make this right. What do you mean, make it right? His voice was heavy with suspicion and pain. Scarlett pulled out a thick manila folder from her expensive handbag. First, Montgomery Industries is prepared to offer you a settlement of $500,000 for wrongful termination and the discrimination you suffered. Booker's eyes widened. $500,000 was more money than he had ever imagined having. Money that could secure his daughter's future, pay for her education and finally give them stability. But there's more, Scarlett continued. We want to offer you your job back with a promotion to floor supervisor and a salary of $75,000 a year, full benefits, pension, everything. Why would you do this? Because it's the right thing to do. Because you deserved better than what happened to you. She paused, choosing her words carefully. And because I need someone I can trust to help me make sure this never happens to anyone else. Booker stared at her, trying to process what was happening. 3 years of struggle, of watching his daughter grow up with hand-me-downs and second-hand toys, of choosing between rent and groceries, of turning down birthday parties because he couldn't afford gifts, and now this woman was offering him everything back, plus more. What's the catch? No catch. But I do have a request. Scarlett's voice grew uncertain. I want you to help me understand what I've been blind to. I want you to help me change Montgomery Industries from the inside to create policies and procedures that prevent discrimination. I want you to help me become the kind of CEO who deserves the power I have. Why me? Because you lived through the consequences of my ignorance. Because you know what it feels like to be judged by your skin color instead of your character. Because, she hesitated, then pushed forward, because I think you might be one of the few people willing to tell me the truth about who I've been. Booker walked to his window, looking out at the street where kids were playing despite the cold. His daughter had wandered over to him, clutching his leg as if grounding him in the moment. Miss Montgomery, do you know what the hardest part of the last 3 years has been? What? Not the poverty, not the struggle to find work, not even losing my house. The hardest part was watching my daughter grow up, wondering why her daddy couldn't give her the life she deserved, wondering if maybe Morrison was right, maybe I wasn't as good as I thought I was, maybe I deserved what happened. Scarlett's face crumpled. Mr. Williams, I'm so sorry. You made me doubt myself in ways that went deeper than money or employment. You made me question my own worth. His voice was steady but filled with pain. So yes, I'll take your job, and I'll help you change your company, but not because I forgive you, then because my daughter deserves better than what you gave me, and so do other people. 2 weeks later, Booker walked through the glass doors of Montgomery Industries corporate headquarters for the first time since his termination. The gleaming lobby, with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers, was a world away from the cramped apartment where he and his daughter had struggled for years. As he adjusted the collar of the new suit he had saved up to buy, he thought about how far this moment was from the nights he'd sat at the kitchen table filling out job applications while his daughter slept. "Mr. Williams," a young receptionist, Destiny Coles, smiled warmly at him. "Miss Montgomery is waiting for you in the executive conference room." As Booker rode the elevator to the 20th floor, he caught glimpses of his reflection in the polished steel doors. He looked professional, respectable, like he belonged here, even if part of him still wasn't sure he. When the doors opened, the conference room was already filled with executives, all white except for one older black woman who nodded encouragingly at him. At the head of the table sat Scarlet, every inch the powerful CEO in her tailored business suit. "Everyone," she began, "I'd like you to meet Booker Williams, our new Director of Employee Relations and Workplace Equity." The title was bigger than what she'd originally offered, and Booker realized she had been thinking deeply about what needed to change. Scarlet continued, "Booker will be conducting a comprehensive review of our hiring, promotion and disciplinary procedures across all divisions. He has full authority to investigate any complaints of discrimination and to recommend policy changes." One of the executives, an older white man with skeptical eyes, leaned forward. "What exactly qualifies Mr. Williams for this position?" Before Booker could answer, Scarlett's voice cut through the tension like steel. "Mr. Williams is qualified because he experienced firsthand the failures in our system. He's qualified because he spent 8 years as an exemplary employee who was wrongfully terminated due to racial bias. He's qualified because he understands the human cost of the policies we're here to fix." After the meeting, Scarlett walked Booker to his new office, a corner space with windows overlooking downtown Detroit. He looked around, stunned by how different this was from the factory floor he had once worked on. "This is incredible," Booker said, still processing the magnitude of the change. "It's a start," Scarlett replied. "I want you to know that I understand you don't trust me yet. I understand that this job doesn't erase what I did to you, but I'm hoping that working together, we can prevent other people from going through what you went through." Booker nodded, his thoughts flicking to his daughter, who was at school. This job meant stability, health insurance, and a future he hadn't dared to dream about for her, but it also meant he was stepping into a fight much larger than himself. "Miss Montgomery, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. Why does this matter to you so much? You could have just written a check and moved on." Scarlett was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city below. "Because for the first time in my life, I'm seeing the real consequences of my action. Because I realized that being powerful means being responsible for how that power affects other people's lives. And because," she paused, then added softly, "meeting you has shown me the kind of person I want to become." Over the next month, Booker threw himself into his new role with the passion of someone who had lived the pain he was now trying to prevent. By day he interviewed employees across every department, combing through hundreds of personnel files. By night he returned home to his daughter, helping with homework at the kitchen table and tucking her into bed before sitting back down at his desk to finish reports. One evening, Booker walked into Scarlett's office, holding a thick folder. "Scarlett, you need to see this." She looked up from her computer, and he noticed she looked tired, her face drawn from weeks of long hours. "What did you find?" "In the past 5 years, Montgomery Industries has terminated 67 employees. 51 of them were people of color. The reasons given were almost identical: attitude problems, cultural fit issues, communication challenges." Scarlett's face went pale. 67 people, 67 families affected. 67 people who went home and wondered if they'd done something wrong. Booker set the folder on her desk. "But here's what's interesting. I also found the supervisors who kept recommending these terminations. It's the same 12 people over and over, including Morrison. Morrison was just the tip of the iceberg. We have an entire network of middle management that has been systematically removing diversity from this company." Scarlett buried her head in her hands. "How did I let this happen under my nose?" "Because you weren't looking for it, and because people like Morrison are experts at telling people like you exactly what they think you want to hear." "People like me," she repeated quietly. "Yes, and if you really want to change things, you can't just fix policies. You have to change how leaders like you listen, and who you believe." Scarlett looked up, her eyes searching his. "Booker, can I ask you something? Please be honest, always. Am I doing this right? Am I making real change, or am I just making myself feel better?" "You're doing it right," Booker said, his voice steady, "but you're also isolating yourself. When's the last time you took a day off?
When's the last time you did something that wasn't about fixing Montgomery Industries? I don't deserve. Everyone deserves happiness. Even people who've made mistakes. Something shifted in the air between them. An intimacy born of honesty and shared purpose. I have an idea, Booker said suddenly. What if we organized a company-wide listening session? Not a formal meeting, but something where employees can share their experiences honestly. Scarlet hesitated. You think people will be honest with me in the room? Not with you in the room as CEO, with you in the room as someone who's learned. Scarlet studied his face, then nodded slowly. All right, let's do it. The listening session was held the following Friday in the company cafeteria. Scarlet had dressed down, wearing simple slacks and a blouse instead of her usual power suit. She sat in a circle with 30 employees. No podium, no presentations, just people talking. Monica Washington, a black woman from accounting, was the first to speak. I've been here 7 years. In that time, I've applied for 6 promotions. I've been told I'm not ready for each one, but I've watched white colleagues with less experience move up around me. Carlos Mendoza, from maintenance, added, my supervisor constantly questions whether I understand instructions. He speaks to me slowly, like I'm stupid, but I have an engineering degree from the University of Michigan. As the stories continued, Booker watched Scarlett's face transform. He could see her beginning to understand the daily reality of being a person of color in her company. The microaggressions, the assumptions, the barriers that were invisible to her, but overwhelming to those who faced them every day. Miss Montgomery, said Jamal Foster from the loading dock, we appreciate you being here, but we need to know, is this real change, or are we going to be talking to the same supervisors who've been making our lives miserable next week? Scarlett stood up slowly. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but full of emotion. Jamal, I can't promise that change will happen overnight, but I can promise that the supervisors who've been discriminating against you will face consequences. Some will be terminated, others will be required to undergo intensive bias training, or face dismissal. She paused, scanning the circle, and I can promise that I'm going to keep showing up to these sessions, not as your CEO but as someone who's learning about experiences I should have taken the time to understand long ago. After the session, Booker found Scarlett alone in her office, staring out the window with tears in her eyes. Are you okay? He asked gently. I had no idea, she whispered. I knew we had problems, but I didn't understand the human These people have been suffering while I convinced myself everything was fine, but now you know, Booker said, and knowledge is the first step toward change. Booker, how do I earn their trust? How do I prove this isn't just temporary guilt? You keep showing up, you keep listening, and you keep proving through your actions that their experiences matter to you. 3 months into working together, Booker noticed that Scarlett had changed in ways that went beyond corporate policy. She no longer spent every lunch alone in her office. Instead, she ate in the cafeteria with employees, learning their names, asking about their families, and listening. She still carried herself like a CEO, but there was a humility now, a curiosity she hadn't possessed before. But Booker also noticed something else. She was driving herself into the ground. One evening, long after most employees had gone home, Booker found her still hunched over her desk. The office was dim, the only light the glow of her computer screen. Scarlett, it's 9 o'clock, he said gently. You need to go home. I'm fine, she murmured. I just want to finish reviewing these performance evaluations. I don't want to miss any patterns of bias. When's the last time you had dinner? A real dinner, not vending machine coffee and granola bars. Scarlett looked up, and Booker could see the exhaustion in her eyes. She shook her head. I don't remember. Come on, Booker said, extending a hand. I'm buying you dinner. Booker, you don't have to. Yes, I do. You're running yourself into the ground and that doesn't help anyone. They ended up at Ruby's Soul Food, a small restaurant in Booker's neighborhood. Scarlett looked out of place at first, her designer clothes contrasting with the worn booths and checkered floor. But the warmth of the place, the laughter, the smell of fried chicken and cornbread, slowly melted her tension. This is amazing, she said after her first bite of macaroni and cheese. How did you find this place? Mrs. Ruby's been feeding this neighborhood for 20 years. When I lost my job, she let me wash dishes in exchange for meal. She made sure my daughter and I never went hungry, even when I couldn't pay. Scarlett looked at him, her fork pausing mid-air. She helped you survive. Yeah, people in this community look out for each other. We have to. No one else will. Scarlet was quiet, processing. Booker, can I ask you something personal? Sure. What was it really like those 3 years after I fired you? Booker set down his fork, considering how much to share. Dark, he admitted. There were nights I wondered if I'd ever work again. Days when I questioned everything about myself, my skills, my worth, my future. I applied for hundreds of jobs and got rejection after rejection. I'm sorry, she whispered, but you know what kept me going? Booker's voice softened. My daughter, she'd look at me with those big eyes, expecting me to have the answers. She didn't understand why I couldn't afford new shoes, or why the lights sometimes went out, but she trusted me, and I couldn't let her down. Scarlet blinked back tears. You had someone who believed in you. Yeah, I had people who saw my humanity when the corporate world saw me as disposable. My neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, who brought groceries when she knew I was struggling. The guys at the community center, who helped me keep my skills sharp, and Ruby, who made sure we never went hungry. Booker looked at her directly. Scarlet, you've been trying to carry all this guilt alone, but you don't have to. You have people who want to help you do better. Do I? She asked softly. Sometimes it feels like everyone just tolerates me because I'm the CEO. Not everyone, Booker said. I see you fighting for change every day. I see you listening and learning and growing. That matters. For the first time since he'd met her, Scarlet smiled. Not her polished corporate smile, but something real and warm. The crisis came 6 months after Booker started his new role. Todd Brennan, one of Montgomery Industries' longest-serving regional managers, filed a formal complaint with the board of directors. In it, he accused Scarlet of creating reverse discrimination against white employees through her reforms. He's calling for your resignation, Booker told Scarlet, handing her the paperwork in her office. Scarlet scanned the document, her face tightening. He's got support from several other executives who think I'm moving too fast. Moving too fast. Booker's voice rose. In 6 months, we've corrected systemic discrimination that's been hurting employees for over a decade. We've created fair promotion processes, implemented bias training, and offered jobs back to people who were wrongfully terminated, and they think that's too fast. Scarlett's voice dropped, heavy with doubt. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am overcompensating. Are you serious right now? Booker snapped. He rarely raised his voice, but this was too important. Scarlet, the board isn't worried about fairness. They're worried about protecting the system that benefited them for years. He began pacing to the window. Todd Brennan was Morrison's mentor. He taught Morrison how to get away with discrimination by disguising it as performance management. Scarlet froze. How do you know that? Because I've been investigating him. Brennan has overseen the termination of 83 employees of color in his 15 years as regional manager. 83, Scarlet, and somehow none of them were ever a culture fit. Scarlet's eyes widened, then dropped back to the papers in her hands. What do you think I should do? I think you should fight. Present the evidence we've gathered to the board. Force them to choose between maintaining a discriminatory system or building something better. And if they choose the system, if they fire me, then you'll know you did the right thing, even when it was hard. Scarlet was quiet for a long moment, then looked up at him with something new in her eyes. Not just determination, but trust. Booker, will you present the findings with me? Will you stand beside me when I face the board? Booker hesitated. You want me to present to your board of directors? I want my partner in this fight beside me when we make our case. The word partner hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than just professional collaboration. Yes, Booker said finally, I'll stand with you.
That evening, as they prepared their presentation together, working side by side until late into the night, Scarlet set down her pen and looked at him. Booker, I need you to know something. This fight, this work we're doing, it's not just about making amends for my mistakes anymore. It's about building the kind of company, the kind of world I want to exist. And I can't imagine doing it with anyone else. Booker studied her face, his chest tightening with emotions he hadn't expected to feel. Scarlet, I know it's complicated. I know our history makes this difficult, but somewhere in these months of working together, fighting together, you've become the most important person in my life. Her confession and his hung between them like a bridge. Neither was sure they were ready to cross. The boardroom at Montgomery Industries had never felt more like a battleground. 12 board members sat around the polished mahogany table. At one end, Todd Brennan looked smugly confident. At the other, Scarlet sat tall, Booker beside her. Their presentation materials were neatly spread across the table. Ladies and gentlemen, Scarlet began, her voice steady and strong. 6 months ago we discovered that Montgomery Industries had systematically discriminated against employees of color for over a decade. Today, we are here to decide whether we want to continue that legacy or build something better. Board member Patricia Webb leaned forward skeptically. Miss Montgomery, Mr. Brennan has raised concerns that your reforms are creating a hostile work environment for our long-term employees. Let me be clear about what Mr. Brennan considers hostile, Booker said, standing to activate the presentation screen. Equal promotion opportunities, fair performance reviews, requiring supervisors to provide evidence before terminating employees. The data they presented was devastating. Chart after chart showing patterns of discrimination, the financial cost of lawsuits, the productivity losses from high turnover among talented employees of color. These reforms aren't reverse discrimination, Scarlett continued. They're discrimination prevention. We are asking supervisors to treat all employees fairly, regardless of race. Brennan shot to his feet, his face red with indignation. This is exactly the problem. We're being told we can't trust our judgment, can't manage our department. We're walking on eggshells around certain employees because of their skin color. No, Todd. Booker's voice was calm but firm. You're being asked to manage all employees with the same standards you've always applied to white employees. If that feels like walking on eggshells, maybe you should ask yourself why. Brennan sneered. I don't need lectures from someone who was fired for cause. The room fell silent.